Be'ezras Hashem, with Hashem's help, we begin today a new set of laws. Hilchos Metam'ei Mishkav Umoshav, the laws of those who transmit impurity to the things that they lie on and the things that they sit on. A new set of laws in this book basically means a new set of sources of impurity. We spent a section of laws on the corpse impurity, paraduma water impurity, tsaras impurity. Now we're moving on to the next category of sources of impurity. And what's unique about this source of impurity, it refers to 4 types of people that all share a quality that they transmit impurity even to the things upon which they lie and upon which they sit. And as we'll see, it's also upon which they stand and upon which they lean and upon which they hang from. That's what puts together all the people we're going to be discussing in this set of laws. Primarily there's four types of people that are biblically considered Metam'ei, Mishkav, Umoshav. It's going to lead to a discussion of other people that are rabbinically considered on this level. Gentiles, Amei Haaretz, unscrupulous Jews. A whole section of this set of laws is dedicated to how we treat Amei Haaretz versus how we treat Chaverim, that's the term for scrupulous Jews. And as we go along, we're also going to discover that the term that the Rambam is using, lying and sitting, also applies to many other things that are on top of them, things that they step on, as we're going to get into throughout the next 2 weeks. Yesh b'chlalan, as the Rambam always does, he gives us the mitzvahs that we're going to be discussing in this set of laws. Yesh b'chlalan arba mitzvahs hasei. Included in this set of laws are 4 positive mitzvahs. V'zeu pratan, these are their details. Aleph, din tumas nida. The law of the impurity imparted by a nida. That's a woman who sees blood at her regular menstrual expected time. Beis, din tumas yoldis. The law of the impurity imparted by a woman who gives birth. Gimel, din tumas zava. The law of the impurity imparted by a woman who has an irregular blood flow, not during her expected period. Daled, din tumas zav. The law of the purity imparted by a zav, that's a man who has an abnormal discharge from his male organ. Ubir mitzvahs elu beprakim elu. The explanation of these mitzvahs is coming in the following 13 chapters throughout the 2 weeks. Many of the subjects, in fact all of the subjects that we're going to be dealing with here, have already been dealt with in prior books of the Rambam. Nida, Yoldis, Zava, these were dealt with extensively in the Rambam's 5th book in the context of forbidden relationships. And again, they came up together with the Zav at the end of the last book in terms of mechusrei kapara, those that have to bring a sacrifice to complete their purification process. So we already know a lot of the rules around these people. This set of laws is exclusively focused on, once they've been established to be this, Nida, Yoldis, Zava, or Zav, now what's the impurity that they impart? In other words, how they become these things, that Rambam will mention, but only briefly. It's been discussed at length in previous books. Here, we're only occupied with the Tumah. Excuse me, I'm just under the weather. The winter is getting to me, so bear with me, please. Okay, Perek Rishon, chapter 1. Halacha Aleph, Hazav, Vehazava, Vehanida, Vehayoldis. A man with an abnormal discharge, a woman with an irregular blood flow, a woman with a regular blood flow, and a woman who gives birth, whether she gives birth to a live or a dead baby. Kol echad me'arbaton av me'avos hatumis. All 4 of these people themselves are considered to be primary sources of impurity, which means once they develop their condition, Metam'ei kelim b'maga, they will transmit impurity even to utensils via direct contact. Umetam'ei adam b'maga uvemasa, and they will also transmit impurity to people who touch them or carry them without touching them. Umetam'ei, and here's the special, unique feature, they will transmit impurity, Mishkav, Umoshav, Umerkav, to things that they lie on, sit on, and ride on, mitachtav, if they are under them, ve'oisa oisan avtuma. And not only does it transmit impurity, but it makes those things a primary source of impurity itself. Commentaries already note over here that, and we're going to see it later in the Rambam, that it's not just anything which he could potentially lie on or sit on or ride on. It has to be something which is meant, clearly designated for use by lying, sitting, or riding. In addition to that, he also transmits impurity to madaf, things that are on top of him, even if they aren't directly touching him. Let's say there's a bunch of layers of clothes. These clothes at the top are not touching the zav, but because they're on top of him, they do become impure. Halacha beis echad zava ketana ve'echad zava gedela. We recall that when it comes to a woman with an irregular blood flow, in terms of her obligation to bring a sacrifice, there are different categories of irregular blood flow. There's what's called zava ketana, a small zava. That means a woman who experienced irregular blood flow only on 1 day or on 2 consecutive days, in which case, typically, she has to just wait 1 day, clean day, to make up for the days that she saw impurity, and then she's back to her permitted state in terms of relationships, etc. Zava gedola means a woman who has irregular blood flow on 3 consecutive days. 3 days now makes her into a major zava. And a major zava is much stricter. She has to bring a sacrifice, she has to count 7 clean days, not just 1 clean day, in order to become pure. But when it comes to impurity, this context of these laws, it doesn't matter whether she was only a zava for 1 day or 2 days or 3 days. It also doesn't matter how the flow began, naturally or because of a circumstance beyond her control. Like sometimes we saw in the Rambam's 5th book, a woman jumps around, she exercises strenuously. This can cause some of the system to begin flowing. And in certain cases, we differentiate between natural and accidental blood flow. But in terms of impurity, it doesn't make a difference. Same thing with the zav. When it comes to a man who's a zav, with regards to sacrifices, it depends if he saw twice or if he saw 3 times. And that's only with regards to other elements of the recovery. But with regards to the impurity, tumas kulan shava l'tamei achedim, the impurity level is all equal in terms of transmitting their impurity to other people. Notice that Rambam over here, when it comes to a zav, doesn't say that it doesn't matter if it's by naturally or because of einus. Because as we explained at the end of the last book, when it comes to a zav, we do check. We do want to make sure that it's coming just naturally, not because of any outside circumstance that may have brought about this abnormal discharge. Halacha gimel ketana bas yom echad mitama benida. Technically, a girl, the day she's born, she can become impure with the tumah of nida, because the first time a woman sights blood as a menstrual flow makes her into a nida. However, bas asara yamim beziva, she only can be a minimum of 10 years old when she first becomes impure with ziva. Why? Because the law, as we've seen in the Rambam's 5th book when it comes to nida, is that once a woman becomes impure with nida, she's impure as a nida for 7 days. Not about clean days or counting, it's just the fact. From the day she saw, for the next 7 days, she's automatically impure. So she can only recover from the nida impurity. Again, technically, it's a wild, outlandish case of a day-old baby. But technically speaking, once she's 7 days old, then you can put her in the mikveh, recover from the nida, and begin the process of developing ziva. Day 8, let's say she has an irregular blood flow. Day 9 and day 10, now you have 3 days of zava gedola. By the way, the commentaries note, really on the 8th day, she could already become a zava katana. But here we're talking about zava gedola. Bas shalosh shanim v'yem echad, once she hits 3 years old, mitama is boyala kameshi yizbar. She has even an additional stringency, that not only is she impure, but if she has relations with a man, the man also becomes impure on account of relations with a nida, as we're going to explain in chapter 3. Halacha daled, that's as far as the girls. What about the boys? Katan ben yom echad mitame beziva. A child even a day old, if there's an irregular flow from his male organ, he'll become impure on account of ziva. Be'echad geirim ba'avadim, be'echad Yisrael. Speaking both to the men and the women. It doesn't matter if you're converts or slaves, regular Jews, mitamin, benido, v'ziva, they're under the rubric of becoming possibly impure through regular and irregular blood flow or discharges. Halacha hey, sris adam, sris chama, an impotent man, whether by intervention of the human who castrated him, or whether he was born impotent, mitamin beziva kishar abriin, if they have an irregular or an abnormal discharge from their reproductive organ, they're going to become impure like any other healthy person. Halacha vav, very important distinction. Ein ha'isha mitama beleven, v'lei ha'ish ba'idam. A woman can never become impure as a result of a white liquid, a white secretion, and a man can never become impure as a result of a red secretion. The only secretions that make a woman impure are red ones, and the only secretions that make a man impure are white ones. Which now leads to the question of what happens if a person, his gender status is in doubt. If somebody's genital area is covered, you don't know whether he's a male or female, or he's a hermaphrodite, he has both reproductive organs. So as we've had once before, we place upon them the stringencies both of men and of women, which means mitamin beleven ki'ish uba'idem ki'isha, whether they have a white secretion or a red secretion, they will become impure. However, the tum'asan besafik, the tumah will only be in doubt. And whenever you have tumah in doubt, so typically when you have definite tumah, if the source of impurity touches truma or sacrificial meat, those have to be burnt. But here, because it's a doubtful impurity, lefichach ein sarfen alein truma v'kadashim, if they contact after seeing the secretions, if they touch truma or sacrificial meat, we're not going to burn it on account of them. And also if they go into the temple or eat sacrificial meat in this state of doubtful impurity, we're not going to hold them liable to punishment. It is forbidden, they shouldn't just go into the temple, but we can't hold them accountable because we don't know for sure if they had a secretion which made them impure or not, whether they're a man or a woman. What if the tumtum or the androgynes had a sighting of both white and red secretions at once? So the Rambam says, we do consider that a definite impurity with regards to now, if they touch truma or sacrificial meat, we are going to burn it. But it still doesn't make them impure enough to hold them accountable for coming into the temple and sacrificial meat. Not because of any logical reason, because it's clear in the Torah. The Torah says, when it comes to sending people out of the temple premises, Shenemar, what does it say? Mizachar ad nekeva teshalechu. The verse before says that anybody that has tsaras or anybody that is a zav, has a abnormal discharge, should be sent away. But then it says you should send away from males to females. Ad sheyiyah hatuma tumas zachar vaday or tumas nekeva vaday. That means that the impurity needs to emerge from a person who is definitely a man or a woman, even though technically both secretions came out. So either way, whatever you're going to put him is going to be impure. But since his own status is not definite, we can't put him under the rubric of this verse of mizachar ad nekeva. Same thing if you have somebody else who touches a white and red secretion of a tumtum and androgenes together. So while he's definitely going to be impure because he's touched liquids that came from a zava or a zav, as we're going to see in a moment, that liquids that emerge from these people also transmit impurity, and he's going to be impure enough that if he touches truma and kadashim, we're going to burn them. But einei chayav al tumas mikdash v'kadashav, we're not going to hold him liable for if in that state of impurity he goes into the temple or eats sacrificial meat. Same thing, doesn't qualify for mizachar ad nekeva. Nogahu ba'atzmai, b'leivin v'oidim shara, if the tumtum randregenes himself touches the white and red secretions which he cited together, now he is going to be held liable for coming into the temple in this impure state. And all the commentaries wonder, what's the difference? If somebody else touches this liquid, what do you say? It doesn't qualify for mizachar ad nekeva, so why should the tumtum randregenes himself, touching a liquid which is coming either from an uncertain man or woman, why should that make him liable? In fact, the Ravid says this case is not talking about, if you look in the source, it's not talking about what the Rambam describes if a tumtum touches his own secretions. It's talking about if a tumtum touches other people's secretions and what the status will be over there. But in terms of his own, the Ravid actually argues and says he'll be exempt from tumas mikdash v'kadashim, and there's some discussion to justify the Rambam's position, as there always is. Halacha ches, dam hanida, oy dam hazava, oy dam hayildas. Besides for the women themselves, when she experiences a regular or irregular blood flow or a birth, the blood that emerges from her is also Metam'ei b'kol shehu, also transmits impurity at even the slightest amount if you touch it, b'mago v'masa, if you touch it or you carry it. Shenemar, because it says, v'hadava b'nidasa v'hazav, a woman who is flowing in her menstrual flow, and a zav, mipiyashmu alamdu, shemadveha kamaya. This verse teaches us, by a certain derivation, that the flow itself also becomes impure. And therefore, the blood itself communicates impurity. We've already explained in the context dealing with the forbidden relationships with Anida in the 5th book, that there are five colors, 5 shades of blood when it comes to impurifying a woman. But if she would see a yellowish secretion, the blood or the secretion is pure. This is a bit controversial because we're going to learn at the end of this chapter that besides for blood that emerges from one of these people, other liquids, other bodily fluids that come out also transmit impurity. So even if the yellowish blood is not qualifying as dam nida, but why don't we consider it to be other bodily fluids? It says that Rambam, it's not like her spittle or any other liquid which comes out of her body, because by nature spit rounds up, it collects, and only then is it discharged, whereas this blood flow of yellowish secretion comes out in a drip drop, and so because it's a different nature, we can't put it under the same category as the other bodily fluids. Halacha tes, isha sheyotza havlad midafna. A woman who gave birth, cesarean section, v'yotza imay dam min adayfen, and some blood emerged during the birth from the wall of her uterus cavity. Hadei oisei dam av me'avos hatumais. The blood is still considered to be impure with a primary source of impurity, kedam hanida, v'haleda, v'haziva, like blood that came out regularly through blood flow or birth. Sha'amakar mekayimei tamei, because the uterus inherently is impure. Any blood that came from the uterus, even if it didn't go the natural way, is impure. But the woman, we can't classify her as a nida. She's going to be pure. She's not going to have the 7-day impurity until the blood emerges by way of the uterus. The commentaries point out she's not fully pure. She's pure from becoming a nida, but she definitely her body touched this blood, which we just said is impure. So she becomes impure at a lower level of tumas erev, a 1-day impurity. Halacha Yud Mekoir ha'isha shenekar v'nafal la'aretz. If a piece of the woman's uterus became dislodged and fell out to the ground, ha'isha tmeya tumas erev. The woman is impure for one day because she touched part of her uterus, no matter where it is. Same thing if the uterus secretes, sweats out, so to speak, two pearl-like droplets, clear-colored. Ha'isha tmeya tumas erev. The woman is considered to be impure for one day, because it's considered to be a secretion of the uterus itself. But to become a nida, 7-day impurity, that she has to see one of the 5 shades of blood, which would make her impure. Halacha Yud Aleph. Hezia tipa achas. If the uterus only secreted one pearl-like drop, that's not considered coming from the uterus. The woman is pure. Because it's only coming from somewhere outside the actual uterus. Uterus only gives out 2 secretions, 2 drops at a time, as the commentaries explain. Halacha Yud Beis Zoivoi Shel Zav. The same way when it comes to the blood of the Nida, Yoldis, and Zava, that it becomes impure. Same thing with the discharge itself of the Zav, the abnormal discharge. Av me'avei satuma is kizav, is considered to be a father, primary source of impurity, like the Zav. Shenemar Zoivoi Tamehu, as it says, Zoivoi, his drip, his flow, is impure. Or Metam'ei b'maga, uvemasa, b'kol shehu, it transmits impurity by touching, by carrying, at the smallest amount. However, only when it's a sighting that makes him into a zav. Re'iyah rishayna shel zav, the very first abnormal sighting which a zav sees, eina metama b'masa. It does not transmit impurity through carrying, only through contact. It's considered to be like semen, whether it emerged from an adult or it emerged from a child. Now, as the Rabbi explains in the Kasef Mishnah also, that when we say bein me'ish katan, we mean not that the zoiv of a katan is like the shichva zera of a katan, because the semen of a katan has no impurity at all. It means that the child's zoiv will be considered like an adult's shichva zera, but at any rate, not transmitting impurity through carrying, only through contact. V'chein ha-mishkaves, v'ha-moishaves, she'yeshev or she'yashav aleim mishara, re'iyah rishayna ad shara hashniya. Same thing, the things that he lies on or sits on from the first sighting to the second sighting, which actually makes him a zav, to hide him, it's pure. Because only called a zav after the second sighting, as we explained in the last book, in the laws of those who need to bring a sacrifice to complete their impurity, to complete their purification. If the zav sees one abnormal sighting, but it's very long, like 2, while it does make him a zav, because it's considered to be 2 flows, but the only element of that secretion which will be impure is the last drop, when he fully becomes a zav. Even though an abnormal sighting of a zav the first time does not transmit impurity through carrying, if the person happened to have tzaras already, and then he has the abnormal sighting, even the first one transmits impurity through carrying. Shenemar, because it says, Kol tzarua, v'chol zav, v'chol tamei l'nafesh. When it talks about sending the people out of the temple premises, it says, those who have tzaras, those who have irregular flows, and those who are impure to a corpse. That means that the person with tzaras is exactly equated to a zav, already at the first point. The same way if you're a complete zav, in other words, you have already 2 sightings. Your flow transmits impurity even through carrying. So to a person with tzaras, the first sighting already transmits impurity through carrying. Halacha Yudalad, now we go to other bodily fluids coming from these people. Reik hazav, the spit of a zav. And his semen and his urine. The same way the actual flow is impure, these other fluids are also impure by biblical law. It's not a rabbinic imposition. Even the slightest amount transmits impurity, touching and carrying. How do we know this? So with the spit, when it comes to spit, it says, if the zav spits on somebody that is pure, which we translate to mean, if a zav spits on something that a tohar is carrying, which means that he's now carrying the spit, it also transmits impurity. As for the urine and the semen, since he's in the middle of an irregular blood flow, so if semen emerges or urine emerges, it for sure has some droplets of the irregular blood flow, which itself conveys impurity. So in a way, the shichva zera and the meiraglayim do not transmit impurity on their own account, but on account of the ziva mixed into them. Halacha tezvav, even though we just said this halacha when it comes to only a zav, echad zav ve'echad nida ve'yoldis ve'zava. Whether it's a zav, the man with the irregular blood flow, or it's a woman with a regular period, with a birthing woman with an irregular blood flow, kol echad mehen, all 4 of these people, ruka yomei miraglav avtuma kezav, their spit and their urine is considered to be a primary source of impurity like the zav. In fact, you should know this for the next bunch of chapters. Whenever we use the word zav, that's code name for all his friends. Echad hazav ve'echad shara arba. It's whether we're talking about the zav or a zava, nida, yoldis, the laws apply across the board. Halacha Tazayin, having mentioned some of the bodily fluids that are considered an av hatuma, the Rambam now summarizes all the potential bodily fluids. Tisha mashkin bezav. We have 9 potential fluids emerging from the body of a zav. Shleisha mehen avtuma. 3 of them are a primary source of impurity. Behain, which they are, rukai v'shichva zarayo memiraglav, the spit, the semen, and the urine. Now, one second. There's a 4th one, the actual flow itself, the zayv itself. Why didn't the Rambam mention that? So, since the reason why the semen and the urine become impure is on account of the irregular flow, so it's already included. All of these have the power of an avtuma, which means they transmit impurity to people and to utensils, even at the smallest amount, as we explained. That's the first 3. The next 3 are considered lower level impurity, child level. 1st degree, 2nd degree, moved away from the primary source. And they are dimas einai, tears from the eye, blood from a wound, and woman's milk. All of these are treated like impure liquids, which we're going to discuss at length, the level of impurity of impure liquids in a later set of laws. They do not transmit impurity to people. They impurify utensils, at least rabbinically, as we explained. 3 of them are completely pure. And they are sweat, and pus that comes out of wounds, and excrement and solid waste. These 3 bodily fluids that come out from the zav and his friends are as though they emerge from another person, totally pure. What about some liquids we haven't mentioned? Phlegm and mucus, and drool, and a runny nose, that belong to the zav and everybody else. The reason we didn't mention it is because like the spit, it's the same thing. They're included under the umbrella of spit, which means they are an av hatum. If you have blood coming out from the male organ, or dripping from his mouth, that's included in blood of a wound, means it's vlad hatuma. If a person was sucking inside his mouth and spitting out blood, now it already has it rises to the power of spit. When you collect in your mouth some blood, you suck, you're bringing also some saliva into it. And now that there's saliva into it, it's a saliva of a zav. Saliva of a zav is an avatuma, as we just explained.